Hello, hello, everyone. How's it going? Hello, everyone, and welcome to, this is going to be webinar 3 for problem-centric selling, diagnostic selling. So we don't have Min today with us, unfortunately. So I wanted to see if everyone could jump in the chat and say hello so I can make sure that everyone is seeing everything. He is usually my, look at that. We already have comments. We already have comments. Okay, so we don't even need Min. Look at that. We don't even need Min. I'm so excited that everything is working. Usually I kind of lean on him as a technical background. So if everyone could jump in the chat, say hi, give your name, give your company, give your role. And why don't we do a fun question? What is your favorite holiday that you've had? I've seen a lot of holidays recently because I am doing US based stuff, and I am doing and I'm obviously based in Paris. So there are Parisian holidays and there are also US holidays. So what is your favorite actual holiday that you have throughout the year? I can kind of lead here. My favorite holiday is going to be, oddly enough, Halloween. I love Halloween and I love Valentine's Day. So just so I can make sure, can everyone hear me at this point? Christmas all the way. You can hear me. I'm so relieved. We can tell him that I don't need him. Please don't tell him that. So we got Christmas. Christmas is a favorite holiday. We have any other favorite holidays? So mine is Halloween, and it's closely seconded, oddly enough, by Valentine's Day, because I love just the kind of junky holidays that mean close to little, where I can get a lot of candy is usually going to be my favorite go-tos. So while y'all are answering that, just a couple of house cleaning items. Sorry, I'm trying to read through the comments here. So Thanksgiving is the best holiday, said Robin. So Robin, what is your favorite Thanksgiving food? Because I'm not, oddly enough, a huge Thanksgiving fan, because maybe it's because my family always says like a really healthy one. And I'm like, I thought the whole point of this was that we don't be healthy when we eat junk food. Sausage dressing. Okay, I'm coming over to Robin's house for Thanksgiving. I hope that you're okay with that. Anywho, so we are going to be jumping into webinar 3 today, and we're going to be talking all about problems. So this is probably going to be my favorite out of the 3 so far. I don't know if it's going to be a favorite for y'all, but favorite for me for sure. We're going to be going into all the different problems that you can essentially find for your buyer. How do you define a problem? How is that all going to be based? What should it be in relationship to? What really is a problem? What are all the different types of problems that you can solve for a buyer? So it's going to be very, I hope, interactive session. But here in the chat is going to be the link to the one-sheeter that you can follow to go into all the different types of problems. So we're going to be anchoring around problems today, what they are, what they aren't, how can you leverage them within selling. So I'm going to... Okay, I think I'm back. Can you still see me, and can you see the my questions? Can you hear me still? Okay, you can see me and you can see the decks. I had a moment of freak out there, but we are going to be going into all the different types of problems today. So this is going to be the deck. So I'm going to go ahead and kick off here, and we're going to kick off with 7 rules of problems, what they are and what they aren't, what the difference kind of is between pain. And then we're going to go into the 12 types of problems. So if you want to pull out your notepad and be kind of taking notes on the different types of problems, if you kind of want to workshop as we go for what the different problems are for you at the organization, the more interaction, the better. The more questions, the better. If you surface them all here in the chat, then I'll try to get to as many as possible. I don't have Min to rely on today. But without further ado, we're going to check into the 7 rules of problems to kind of give a ambit of direction and kind of a definition basis here. So rule number 1 is going to be, there's a difference between a pain and a problem. So if y'all could go into the chat, how many of you were around for, yes or no, were around for either webinar 1 on diagnostic selling or webinar 2 on what we are challenging? Yes, Mari, we're recording, I think. So if you were around for webinar 1 or webinar 2, if so, which ones were you around for? Okay, so we've got all yeses so far. So this we covered pretty heavily in webinar 1 and 2, actually, but the difference between a pain and a problem is going to be, from a high level, pain is going to be anything negative in the present. Sorry, anything negative experience overall. And a problem is going to be anything that someone solves or solves for. So anything in the negative, or any kind of negative experience versus anything that someone solves or solves for, is going to be the difference. And the impact of that difference, and knowing that difference, is not all pains are problems, meaning not all things that are annoying are we going to solve for, and not all problems are painful yet. Sometimes we're solving for something to avoid a problem in the future, but there is no current pain. So there's a number of different pains in everyone's day. I mean, there's probably thousands and thousands and thousands of things that we go throughout our day and we're like, this is a negative experience, or we think we're going to run into a negative experience. But we're not going to solve for all of them based on amount of priority. So a great example of this is my dad is a problem solver. He's an engineer by trade. Most of my family is either engineers, scientists. Oh, Scott, can you not hear? Is everyone can still hear me? Is that correct? Just want to make sure we have no technical issues. So here's a great example. A pain would be a negative experience, meaning if y'all couldn't hear me, that'd be a negative experience if people couldn't hear me on a Zoom link. But if it was only one person maybe, or it was a personal call, or etc., I probably wouldn't go throughout a platform and figure out all the things of why the person couldn't hear me necessarily. Like if it was just a friend and we could handle it over text message. But a problem is going to be anything you're going to solve or solve for. So if y'all couldn't hear me right now, the impact to me would be that there's hundreds of people who can't hear me. They show up for a webinar, that they have graciously given their time to give. And the impact could be that if I didn't have my stuff enough together to have a webinar today, why would you register in the future? Why would you come to another webinar in the future? So that level of disappointment could prevent, churn, people leaving the webinar, people having a bad impression of Flip the Script, and from a technical perspective, me, and they wouldn't show up to a webinar in the future. And because this series is so important to me, that impact is high enough to where I would immediately do something about it. So great example of that is this weekend, me and Min, so Min's actually traveling from Vietnam to the US right now. And even though we had close to zero time, and even though we were in bad reception areas, we managed to put together some time to review how to do this webinar because it was so important to me. The impact was important to me. So I solved for that in the moment. And I honestly would have bought something if there was something that you couldn't hear me, and there was an option for a purchase of you could hear me, I would have bought because the impact is so large. So not all pains are problems. If it was a personal call, I probably wouldn't have solved for it or bought anything. But if the impact is big enough and the pain is egregious enough, I'm going to do something about it. That could mean buying something, that could mean changing my process, but the impact is going to be large enough in the present. So not all pains are problems. Not all things that are a negative experience we're going to do something about. And not all problems are painful quite yet. So that's kind of the first rule of problems to give kind of a direction. Rule number 2 for problems, and I hate that these are like rules, by the way. I feel like a very, very strict abidance here, is going to be a problem is only a problem in the presence of a metric. So Jordan Peterson, love him, don't like him, etc., covered this actually quite a bit, that he said, basically, you cannot have a positive outcome, a positive upside to something without a negative retribution unless a goal is present. So the goal in this for this purpose is whatever the buyer's metric is. A problem is always going to be oriented around a buyer's metric. So, for instance, if we were talking about, a sales development rep, let's see if everyone can jump in the chat. What is the metric, the one metric that a sales development rep would care about? What is the thing that, meetings booked, Annika got it. So let's keep going. What is the metric that a sales rep would actually care about? So SDR is going to be meetings booked in SQL. TJ got it. Closing, deals closed. So let's keep going here. What about a marketer? What would a marketer care about? What is the metric that they're usually after hitting? MQL, brilliant, leads. So they're going to view a problem, meaning something that they're going to do something about, is always going to be in relationship to that metric, or a goal in relationship to the metric. So a great example of a goal in relationship to a metric is, let's imagine that all my team is past my SQL quota if I'm an SDR leader, but because they're so far past quota, they want to become AEs really quickly. So, and my AE team isn't ready to onboard them because they don't believe that they're ready, to go into discovery. So my SDRs would start to churn, and they would start to lose faith in the organization and go to other companies because there's no career pathing. They can't learn anything they haven't learned, et cetera, et cetera. So all of a sudden, my goal is to fix the churn problem, but it's in relationship to, I want to keep my SQL target on quota, like on the right path. So people are always going to view a problem in the relationship to the metric that they have. So a really common myth all the time. And if you're anything like me, I remember the first time that I heard about problem-centric selling or problem-centric ideas. And someone asked me, what problem do you solve? And I'm like, I don't know. I really didn't know. And so it made it quite a bit easier for me, is a problem is something that you can't do, and it's always going to be in relationship to the metric that person, that buyer persona, is metriced on. So the first step that you can do is just by simply going to Google and saying, like, okay, what are the KPIs, for my buyer persona? And then view the entire infrastructure of the conversation as it's going to be something that's anchored around those metrics of a person. So I'll hear the myth all the time, that people say, let's get the entire buying committee, sales enablement, SDR, sales operations in a room, and let's get them to agree on the problem that exists. And I'm like, I can't imagine a worse idea. Because if everyone were to be truthful, they're viewing, let's say, sales training, for instance. How can sales training help me, for an SDR leader, book more meetings? If I'm how can sales training help my SDRs, for instance, book more meetings, but book higher quality meetings with high level titles, with high buyer intent, with really big organizations? Because I'm after closed won. So volume of meetings is a part of that, but I'm going to essentially, as a buyer, jerry-rig whatever you're pitching to me as, how can I use this item to help achieve my goal? Or as a marketer, same exact thing. How can this item, service, etc., help achieve my goals? So the problem that a sales enablement professional is solving for is they're metriced on training adoption. So they're like, I want a really centralized training. An SDR leader is like, I want a training that's going to help me book more meetings. And the sales leader is like, I want, a sales training that's going to help them book more meetings, but also higher quality meetings, and also ones that have high buyer intent so that I can close them. So the problems that we're trying to solve as a buyer persona, if I'm trying to get them to agree, they might agree on a solution because the same solution can help solve all three buyer personas' problems. But the problem that they're trying to solve for, in the core of us, we're selfish. So we want to kind of give it, we want to land on the solution that's going to help us achieve the metric. So we have a question in here. I hope I'm not butchering your name. Is it Elicio? Elicio Lopez says, what happens if the service we offer is kind of new and the prospect does not have metrics? So if you wouldn't mind, if you could give me your buyer personas, that would be helpful. But I could start with what if the service is new? So I've actually worked in mostly my tech history is I worked for Gong when it was probably 10 people. I worked for Chorus when it was probably 85 people at the time whenever I joined. But I am in kind of the business of category creation. So Gong wasn't really a concept before we came to market. So I'm certainly in the mindset or have the experience of having to sell something new. So in my opinion, you offering something that's a new service to the industry is going to be anchored around you either number one, if it's a new service, you either solve a new problem that people didn't know that they had, solve a problem that people did know that they have in a different way than they knew was available. So I'll give you an instance in the Gong and Chorus instance of conversation intelligence. People always knew that they had the problem of, that they weren't hitting quota. So some ways that they would try to solve for that is they would buy sales training to make their reps better at discovery. But one of the ways they didn't know that they could solve for it is by ascertaining the information of how are they doing discovery today and assessing their reps at large that they didn't know that they could do. So it was a new way to solve the same problem of quota attainment. So it gave me the visibility into my conversation instead of just feeding the inputs of, let's train them, and then let's get their rendition of what's happening in the deal or what's happening in the conversations and what that rep thinks that the next step is to let me give the leader the joystick, so to speak, so that they can diagnose at large, at scale, and quickly so they can help get their reps better, not by training, but identifying where they're going wrong and coaching them to quota. So the latter part of the question, a prospect is always going to have, regardless of the prospect, there's going to be always going to be a quantitative metric that answers a qualitative question. So is this a good blank? Is this a good HR professional? Is this a good CS professional? Is this a good sales rep? So I'll give you an example of that. I have a qualitative question, let's say we have two baseball teams playing one another. And the qualitative question is which team, the Texas Rangers or the New York Yankees, is the better team that day? If y'all would jump in the chat, what's the quantitative metric that would measure that? So the qualitative question is, who's the better team? New York or the New York Yankees or the Texas Rangers? What's the yeah, we already got it. Who won? TJ said, where do you live? Who won? So Annika, I want to dig deep in there. What do you mean by who won? How do you score points in baseball? What is that? It's a number, but how do you score a point in baseball? What would be the rules around it? How many can you score at one time? And what are the rules of engagement? So yeah, home runs, you move the guys across the plate, etc. So let's transition for a second. Let's go to soccer, let's say, or as the Parisians would say, football. So the qualitative question is soccer team 1 better than soccer team 2? So what's the quantitative metric that establishes that? Is soccer team goal scored? Right. So in baseball, the point was acquired by running across home plate, and in soccer, it's acquired by putting the ball in the net. So let's go to basketball, for instance. In basketball, the qualitative question is who's better, the Mavericks or the Suns? What's the quantitative metric that measures that, of who's better in that game? Hoops. The ball goes through the hoop. So in basketball, you can score a point by throwing a ball through a hoop, and you can either get 1 point, 2 points, or 3 points. In soccer, you can earn a point, only 1 point, strictly 1 point, by putting a ball in a net. If I don't know my buyer persona's metric, it's like if I was playing soccer Someone passes me the ball. I pick it up with my hands. I see a basketball net outside of the field. I throw it. It goes through the basketball net, and I'm happy. So I'm happy because I threw this ball, this soccer ball. I picked it up with my hands and threw it through the basketball net that was out of bounds. Why would that make the other soccer players on my team mad? The action that I did. Someone passes me the ball with their feet. I pick it up with my hands and I throw it and I make it in a hoop. I scored a point technically, but why would that make all soccer players on my team probably mad? See if anyone can guess. Yeah, it's not the same, right? Robin's like, no, it's not the same point. It's not the same sport. So I didn't understand the rules. So it actually, in one situation, throwing that ball through the hoop would have won me points, right? But in this situation, not only did it not win me points, but I actually would have a foul because I picked the ball up with my hands. So knowing a buyer persona's metric is the exact same thing. If I say, hey, this is going to help you a lot with closed won deals, but I'm talking to an SDR leader, they're like, that's great, but I don't really care about closed won deals. What I care about is booked SQLs. Now, they might achieve the same thing, but what I'm at best case scenario, if you don't know their metric, they're going to go, that kind of hits the spot. I think that the same skills to close one a deal would be the same skills that they'll need on a cold call to book the meeting. But best case scenario, your buyer will believe in that situation that you don't know them, that you don't know what they're really after in the room. So that's the second rule is going to be the problem is only a problem in the presence of a metric. So here are the metrics. I'm not going to go too deep into these because I'm going to try and stay on time so I can prove men wrong and win a bet. But there are 3 different types of metrics, and they're very important on the differences. So I'm going to hit them from a high level, and then we're going to move on into rule 3. The first is a lagging indicator. And this is going to be what that buyer persona is ultimately metriced, hired, fired, promoted, demoted to drive. It's going to be the lagging indicator. So what is the most important outcome that they are measured on typically? So if I'm a CRO, for instance, it's going to be revenue. I'm a business owner, it's going to be not going bankrupt, and it's going to be revenue, but it's going to be not going bankrupt, the business overall. If I am a CSM, it's going to be upsell, cross-sell, retention, NPS score. If I'm an HR professional, for instance, let's go a non-sales one. If I'm an HR professional, it's going to be roles that are filled, it's going to be open roles, and employee satisfaction and employee churn. So there's only a certain few amount of metrics, I would say, for any buyer persona, you're going to have anywhere from 3 to 5 metrics that they are metriced on from a lagging indicator perspective. A leading indicator is going to be an input that they're going to change to affect the lagging indicator. So for instance, if I were trying to lose, if my lagging indicator that I was trying to solve for is I wanted to lose 25 pounds. What are some examples of the leading indicators, meaning the inputs that I would change to get there? If y'all would jump in the chat, if you don't mind. Food, right? I would change the amount of calories that I'm eating. I'd probably try and go down because I'm trying to lose, 25 pounds. Calories burned, calories consumed, less food, exercise. So the lagging indicator is do I lose the 25 pounds, but the leading indicators that I'm going to change to get there is going to be calories consumed, how much do I exercise, how much do I exercise, and how often do I do that, how much amount of time. But there's some other leading indicators sometimes that people didn't know about. Like, for instance, Shane binged in here, sleep. Sleep is something that you could change. It's a lesser known indicator for weight loss. So the leading indicators, point being, if you only think about leading indicators, like if I only thought about email quality, for instance, and I didn't pay attention to my lagging indicators, that's great that I think the leading indicators are working, but I'm not actually checking if they are. If I'm only focused on a lagging indicator, meaning I'm staring at the scale all day long, or for my sales development managers or AE managers, you're refreshing the dashboards in your CRM to see if your reps close more, then that's great. You're checking if things have changed, but you're not enabling people to change them because you're not showing them what they need to change. So you've got leading and you've got lagging. The third sneaky one that I always wonder if I should cover this one, but I'm going to cover it very briefly, is what's called a leaning indicator or a coincidental indicator. This is an indicator that you are on the right path, but it is not the ultimate indicator that someone is measured on. So I'll give you an instance. The lagging indicator for an SDR is booked SQLs. A couple of leading indicators that they might change to affect that outcome is email quality, email quantity, time of day that they're sending it, who are they sending it to in terms of buyer persona, how many people the organization are they sending it to, are they multi-threaded, at what kind of channel are they sending it over, is it email, is it cold call? But a leaning indicator, again, they're not ultimately metriced on, meaning they're not hired, fired, demoted, promoted to drive it, but it's a good indicator in real time of if they're on the right path. A great example of that for SDRs would be open rate or reply rate. So I'm not paid at the end of the day to drive open rate. Even if I got the open rate, let's say, to someone to 95%. If it's not helping them book more meetings, that's what I'm paid. I can't pay my rent with open rates, but I can pay it with is SQLs. So the reason that I bring these three indicators up is these are what your buyers are thinking about. So I would think about rule 2 is a problem is only a problem in relationship to a metric. So the first thing that need to do to understand a buyer's world, to talk in their terms, to help them, to build credibility, to be able to diagnose, to have them want me around, is I need to figure out what are these for my buyer personas. Typically in onboarding, I'll see like a bunch of product training, they'll spend time with the other teams, they'll get to know their AE, there's the origin story, on and on and on we go. But I see usually a small deck and like a 30-minute session on the buyers. And I'm like, oh la la. It'd be like, oh yeah. And here's our buyers. Here's the personas. Here's a nice little slide deck. If it were me and I were redoing an onboarding program, I would spend 75% of my time on teaching reps who my buyers were. And I would start with their metrics. So if I don't know how to use a piece of tech platform, that's going to hurt a little bit as an SDR or as an AE, but I'll figure it out. What I won't figure out likely is who my buyers are. So I would start with the rule number 2 of problems is you have to view only the problem that they have to solve in relationship to their metric. And to do that, you need to find out what these are. Last note here on leading indicators. People usually care about leading indicators, oddly enough, more than they care about lagging indicators. It's like I'll see people posting on LinkedIn all the time. This causes a 14% increase in reply rate. But a reply rate increase doesn't matter if it's not helping me book more meetings, but people are very attracted to it. So I'd get to know these for your buyer is rule number 2. Rule number 3, we're going to speed up here. A pain only becomes a problem under certain conditions. So a pain, meaning a negative experience, only becomes something that someone decides to do something about in certain conditions. Those 2 conditions are the level of acute pain in the present is high enough, or number 2, the impact is big enough if I don't solve for it. So I'll give you an example. I was training one day in a hotel in Boston and it was cold. It's like, I don't know, 60 degrees, 65 degrees in the hotel. It's probably a team of, 50. And I said, so to kind of drill this point home, I said, for instance, it's cold in here. Can we all agree on that? And everyone was like, yeah, I'm freezing. It's been freezing all day. And I'm like, It has been freezing all day, but it's 3:30 p.m. and no one has actually done anything about it. No one's gone to the hotel staff, even though we had lunch, we had a couple breaks in there, people could have left. No one has actually done anything. Yes, Chris. Chris is on here. Chris is the VP of sales during this SKO. I wish Chris could come up on screen, but we were at this hotel. And Chris, how cold was it, do you think? It's probably, I don't know, 60, 65 degrees. And it was cold all day. I still remember this. I was like, I am freezing my butt off. So Chris is the VP of sales. So I said, for instance, guys, it's cold in this hotel. No one said anything about it yet, though. Yeah, it was 60 in there. But I said, Chris, let's imagine for a second. I looked around the room. I'm like, okay, let's imagine, though, that instead of it being 60, that it got to 50. Would y'all do something about it then? And they're all like, hell yeah. I couldn't handle 50 degrees. So that's condition one, is the level of acute pain was high enough in the present. It got to 50 degrees. So that would immobilize us to do something about it. 60, we're fine. We're still in pain, but we're not going to do something about it. Hasn't become a problem yet. But 50, and we would have basically, we're okay, this is insane. The level of acute pain in the present is too high. The second instance is I turned to Chris and I said, Chris, let's imagine that it's 60, but your reps start leaving from the training. Like people are starting to feel sick, they can't handle it anymore. They can't focus. To his point, he put everyone was awake though. Let's say that it stayed at 60, but that people started to fall asleep. They started to leave the session and they started to go home because of the temperature. I said, Chris, do something about it then. And Chris, I want you to jump in the chat. What did you say back to me? I said, let's imagine that all these reps start churning from the session. Yeah, they're fired. Would you have done something about it in that case? Let's say that all these reps started churning from the session. He said yes. And I'm like, why? Let's see if he goes into chat one more time. Why would you have done something about the temperature in that case scenario? The reps start leaving, they start being sick, and they can't be a part of the training. So the point being is this second instance of the impact is high enough is Chris had nicely, thank you, Chris, paid me to come out to train everyone on the SKO. He said the impact was growing. So if reps start churning, even though the pain in the present stays at 60, but the impact starts to grow of now he's churning reps because of it, people won't be able to focus on the training. Even if they do stay, some reps would leave and not get the training at all. All of a sudden, the impact to him was big enough to where it would have mobilized him to do something about it. So the point of this rule is 60 degrees, it's a pain, it's not a problem. He's not going to move on it. We didn't move on it all day. But if it got to 50, meaning the pain's big enough in the present, or if reps started to leave, the impact is big enough we don't solve for it, it would have mobilized him in both cases to do something about it. But at 60, if the pain stays as is and there is no extended impact, he would have stayed in his chair, and we did. Rule number 4, I'm so glad Chris is in here, so people don't think I'm completely full of crap. Rule number 4, the size of a problem is equal to or the amount of pleasure, usually the amount of pain, plus the amount of impact. So that is the size of a problem in someone's head is going to be the amount of pain or pleasure, meaning the amount of experience right now, plus the amount of impact because of the problem, if they do or don't solve it. Rule number 5 is buyers are only going to buy based on the size of the problem. So we're going to buy to solve a problem. And I'm only going to buy more, or I'm only willing to spend more or less money or buy it more or less quickly based on the size of the problem. So if the impact is super high, if the pain's not that bad, but the impact is super high, in my head, I'm paying someone to alleviate that problem altogether. So buyers are only going to buy based on the size of the problem. So rule 4 is the size of the problem is the pain or pleasure plus the amount of impact. 5 is buyers only buy based on the size of the problem. Why that matters is rule number 6 is the size of the problem only equals the buyer's perspective of the size of the problem. So let's imagine for a minute. Right, Mari nailed it. Mari, you should just give the rest of this presentation. Said it more succinctly than I ever could. Said, I'm going to spend $10 to fix a $5 problem. But I'll spend $1 billion to fix a $5 billion problem. So let's imagine that the size of the problem, the actual problem, is the United States, size of the United States. But the problem that I know about as the buyer is only the size of the state of Texas. I only know about the problem of the size of the state of Texas. But the actual problem that exists is the entire United States. The reason this is important is because of rule number 5 accompanied with number 6. I'm only going to buy based on the size of the problem. And if the size of the problem equals my perspective of the size of the problem, if someone comes in and they believe that they are solving something for the size of the state of Texas, then they're going to pay you to solve and they're going to have the urgency to solve the problem that's the size of the state of Texas. Our job in sales is to find out, number 1, what do they believe the problem to be? Why? And number 2, are there other states that exist? And are they aware that these other states that exist? So that number 7, I can increase the size of the problem. I'm not instigating something that wasn't already happening. What I'm uncovering is that they didn't know that this problem exists. So sales is defined as a profession. I'll hear call after call after call after call after call for discovery call. And they're like, what's the pain? What do you think the impact is to you if you don't solve the problem? Self-diagnosis after self-diagnosis after self-diagnosis. And I'm like, that's all fine and good. But if you're asking for self-diagnosis information only, then number 1, I have no idea why they would want you involved as a rep. They don't. And number 2, you are not helping them to any degree because you're not uncovering anything about them that they didn't know. But number 3, and this is going to hurt, and I say this with myself included, you're the definition of an order taker. They want to order something, a set of French fries. If you're pain selling only, you want to know why so that you can hit them with follow-up of like, didn't you want these French fries? Didn't you say that if you didn't have these French fries that your kids would go hungry? But there's no reason for a seller to be involved at that point. Their expertise is not product knowledge. If it was, I think the product team would have something to say about that. And if it was, even if they were product experts, the fastest way to do that is speed of lead, which means I would just put a product demo up on my website based on buyer persona and put the pricing at the bottom. PLG as a movement and as a wave has been created because Gartner has put out a number of stats that say anywhere from 83 to 86% of buyers don't want a seller involved. Because what the seller adds is pressure to the equation. We don't want a human experience. We don't want people involved unless that human can tell us something about us that's going to hurt us, that is accurate. Then we want a human involved. But if you remove that piece from the equation, if you're not finding anything that the buyer didn't know, you're an order taker. And there are faster ways to take orders. Put up a order taker button on your website, and a number of different stats will show you that the faster you get back to a lead, speed to lead is the main predictor of whether someone closes with you. So if I contact 5 vendors and it takes vendor 1, 2 days to get back to me, 2, 3 days, 3 days, 4, so on and so forth. But if vendor number 5 gets back to me in 5 minutes, and I jump on the demo and I show them all this product knowledge, vendor number 5 will win. So if we are not diagnosing things for them in this room, if we're only going off of pain information, stuff they already know, then we're the definition of an order taker. We didn't add any value to the room. They don't want us involved. And we're banking on the fact that we can get them to like us in the room. So the fastest way to actually be more, actually have a role in sales, not have to worry about whether the person, quote unquote, likes you. You don't have to be a part of the equation at all. Doctors don't. Is to diagnose. You need to diagnose for rule number 4. What do they think the pain is? What do they think the impact is? Why do they believe that? Because they're going to buy based on the size of the problem. The problem's only equal to the perspective of the problem. But in this big map, let's say that they left out, they didn't know about an impact that was going to happen to them that's the size of the state of California. Or they didn't know that actually that state that they thought was a state, which is China, isn't a state. That wasn't the right problem to solve. Or they didn't know a current impact that's linked to the problem that they want to solve, that's Oklahoma. And all of a sudden you can fill in the gaps for your buyer, not generally speaking, but for them in specific. They thought that the size of the problem was only this small impact, but actually the size of the problem that they're willing to spend money on and have urgency to buy is the size of the entire United States. So how you've influenced the sale is not anything other than influencing their perspective by diagnosing things that they didn't know about. So I'm going to give you one example, and then we're going to get into the 12 types of problems. Long and the short of it, I'm in a little bit of legal stuff in France. So I need help. So number of different visas you have to apply for, I won't even get into it. But I was desperate last week for a lawyer to get involved, to understand what I needed to do next and by when. Because the impact to me was, hypothetically, I would have to leave France right now to wait for a visa to be approved so that I didn't hit a 90-day rule, basically, within France, overstay my visa, and then can never come back to France. That was impact to me. So I'm like, I am desperate to find a lawyer. I would have paid probably $1,000, €1,000, just to get a meeting with a lawyer to understand something that I didn't know. And the things that I didn't know was, what's the best course of action? When should I do what? And what should the next step be based on my current criteria? So I'm going to give you my experience, and then we're going to go into the 12 types of problems. I went back and forth with a number of different lawyers, and one of the lawyers said, oh, actually what you've submitted for is wrong. You need this long-term visa as opposed to a residence permit. So I'm paranoid all weekend. I lost sleep. I had stomach ulcers. They were flaring up, TMI. He was like, come in on Monday and we can talk about this. So I had detailed out to him all of the different action steps, what had happened and when had happened. And that, just line after line after line, assuming that he had read it, because he prescribed to me that I needed to apply for a long-term visa. It didn't sound right, but I'm like, who am I? He's a lawyer. I sweated all weekend. I go in yesterday. I'm a big walker and runner, 6 miles to get to his office. It wasn't snowing, not being dramatic, 6 miles to get to his office. Yeah, totally, Mari. Honestly, one of the ways that you can do it is marry someone. And I had someone offer, and I thought about it for an uncomfortable amount of time. Should I get married on Saturday to alleviate all of this? Right? I watched 6 walks. I'm not kidding. The person was like, "I'll marry you." And I was like, "We can't do that. We can't do that. No one's married anyone. Okay? There's no wedding, there's no vows, no one's married anyone." I walked 6 miles to this guy's office, sign a prenup. 6 miles to this guy's office. I show up in person, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, okay, well, let's try to find a seat for you." They're like moving all these papers around, and I'm like, "You don't even have a seat in the lobby?" I'm like, "This is not looking good." So I go into this guy's office, and he's like, "Come on in." And he's like, "I think I know your situation, but why don't you just tell me just a little bit?" And I'm already furious because I'm like, "You think you know my situation? Man, bro, I detailed it out line by line by line in the email." But you're like, the thing that infuriated me was I'm like, "You said, tell me a little bit about this." And I'm like, "You don't need a little bit to give me a little advice. You need the whole context to give me the best advice." So I start telling him the dates that I submitted, when I submitted for things, when I came to France, when I came back, and he kept cutting me off. He's like, "Yeah, I don't need that." So he prescribed me a long-term visa. Then I managed to squeak in 2 or 3 more details. He's like, "Oh, you don't need that. You need a short-term visa." Then I was like, "Hold on, I'm not finished." And I told him a couple other things. He's like, "No, you need a residence permit." I'm like, "This is misprescription, like on steroids. This is like Brendan times 10. This is the worst experience of my life." Okay. Then he calls in someone from the outside. He's like, "Hold on, let me ask this other person," brings in this other person for the real consultation. Other person comes in, and I say a amount of details. And they were like, "How long have you been here as a tourist?" I'm like, "I haven't been here as a tourist. So I've been here on the visa the entire time." And I was like, so I had wondered at one point, I'm like, "Do my 90 days count when I am on a visa?" And they were like, "No, they don't." And I'm like, "Problem alleviated. I don't need any of the crap that he just prescribed. Any of the crap that that first guy prescribed." I was like, "I don't need a long-term visa. I don't need a short-term visa. I don't need to marry anyone. I don't need to apply for an additional residence permit. I'm fine for another 90 days, which the permit will be approved within 2 months. So I'm good to go. I can go back to the US. I have a conference. I'm going to be speaking at HubSpot's Inbound." That was the impact to me, is I either couldn't go back to the US and speak at Inbound, where Derek Jeter and Reese Witherspoon are also speaking, or if I did, potentially I couldn't come back to France, not only then, but ever. So the 2 points here are, number one, what would I have paid for sound advice? €1,000. But number two is, when I couldn't get enough details in there and he wasn't asking me enough questions, I'm like, I want the, honestly, I'm on the line here without men, so there are no rules. I wanted this dude dead in a ditch. I'm like, you for real, almost misprescribed me 3 different long legal process, which the fact of the matter was I didn't need anything. I'm good to go. So when we cut our prospects off and we don't ask a certain amount of questions to uncover what their true problem is and their true root cause is and what their true current impact is and future impact is, we lose all credibility with them, number one. We lose all reason of why they would want us involved at all. And we could very, 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 and I'm saying this with all heart, my heart is like beating a million miles an hour. You can misprescribe them the wrong thing. So if I had listened to lawyer one and they had said, go apply for a long-term visa and leave the United States immediately, I didn't need to do any of that. And I would have entered a 3-month legal process with the French government for zero reason at all. I would have left to the United States immediately. I would have racked up thousands of dollars in hotel bills for no reason. And it would have put me in a worse spot than I currently am today. So that is not only the value, but the responsibility of selling, is asking the right amount of questions to diagnose their problem in entirety, to figure out when they've misdiagnosed something or they've missed a diagnosis. The reality is I was close to the correct diagnosis, but I didn't know. And I was so uncomfortable with not knowing for sure and the impact of being wrong was so big to me that I'm like, I have to seek out this someone's advice. So diagnosing the problem is going to be the entire role of the seller. It's the only reason why we're in the room, essentially. So I'm going to, without further ado, we're going to kick off into the 12 types of problems. This is going to be the fun part. Maybe more fun for people than me going on a rant about legal process. I'm fine, guys. Don't worry. I called my dad, and my dad about started crying. He was like, okay, so you're not getting married, you're all good. So these 12 types of problems, again, they can be seen in the asset basically below, or that I put at the top of the chat, that you can download. But there's 12 types of problems, and essentially, again, a problem is going to be only a problem in relationship to a metric, or a goal in relationship to that metric is how I'm going to define it. So I have ordered these problems in the order of which people will typically come in and come with, a major robust action to buy, and that you'll see the most often. So the first type of problem is going to be a negative-based symptom problem. Negative-based symptom problem is essentially they are incurring a negative symptom right now, some certain amount of pain, and the outcome that they're trying to solve for is alleviating that negative symptom. So there's examples in each one of these, but essentially the example in this case is someone inbounds and they're like, I'm only at 52% of quota. And the impact that I am afraid of is if I stay at 52% of quota, then I'm going to get churned by next month. So this is going to be problem number one. It's all pain-based. And they're essentially someone's outcome is always going to be hinged around the impact. So maybe it's a good idea to go into, from a technical perspective, a little bit of the difference between an outcome, an impact, and a problem. And a pain. A pain is any negative experience. A problem is the metric that they want to solve for. Metric or the goal in relationship to that metric that they want to solve for. The impact is the extended pain or the extended pleasure that's driving them to buy, essentially. And the outcome is what they want to see in the future state, the ideal state that would solve the problem and essentially avoid or incur the impact at hand. So in a negative symptom-based problem, the pain that they're currently experiencing is they're only at 52% of quota. The impact is of not solving for it is that the pain will increase. And in this example, they're afraid that they're going to get fired and that their reps are going to start to churn. So the outcome that they want to see is basically the negative symptom is alleviated and the impact is avoided in the future. The current impact goes away, the current pain goes away, and the future impact is avoided in problem number one. This is going to be inbound central, meaning people are going to come in, based for inbound that they're like, I'm in pain, I'm not at quota. So in this example, they're only at 52% of quota. So the outcome that they want to be at is that they are at full quota and that they avoid the future impact of being let go as a leader. That's going to be a negative symptom-based problem. By the way, we're going to be going into some technical stuff. So if there are questions, I would love them. Everyone's either died off or gone on a break. They're like, Beck's gotten too fired up and legal. They've left. So if you have any questions, I would love them in the chat, or maybe just like a cuckoo or like, hey, TJ's still here. So I'm going to keep going just for you, TJ. But this is the Seth, Tony, and Tony's still here. We got some people still here. We're still going, guys. Thought I scared people off with the French government stuff. So the second type of problem is going to be by the way, with a negative symptom-based problem, this is something that they're solving, not solving for. Solving is they're resolving something in the present to avoid a future impact. But this is going to be solving. Threat-based problem is going to be the second type of problem. And in a threat-based problem, someone is solving for something in the present, And the outcome that they're looking to achieve is essentially they don't want the threat in their head of what's going to happen to become true. So the impact of what they're solving for is in a threat-based problem, there is no current pain usually, or there's only a little bit. But the problem that they're trying to solve is how do I remedy either my current situation or who I am in the future state so that this threat doesn't become true, so that the impact of that threat becoming true isn't realized. So I'll give you an example. And these are all real examples, by the way. Prospect came in and we're on discovery call. And they're like, well, I want my team's discovery calls to be better. So negative symptom-based problem, just as a heads up, is usually always around their metric. They're like, I'm not hitting my MQL quota. They're in HR. They're like, I'm missing my, employee satisfaction, and employees are starting to churn. So I'm always into the definitions. I'm like, how many employees are starting to churn? Has that happened recently? Like, I want an actual number so I can size the problem. But a threat-based problem usually is indicated by all of a sudden a new buyer intent, or they are past their quota. So in this instance, someone came in and they're like, we need better discovery calls. I'm like, okay, walk me through it. Take a step back. What are discovery calls like right now? What's the conversion into close one, et cetera, et cetera. And they were actually past quota. So I'm like, I'm confused. If you don't mind me asking, why now? Like, what happened? You seem to be like ready to go, like to move. They're like, well, we are past quota right now, but here's the thing. We have heard from a number of different companies who didn't go with us that the reason they didn't go with us is that point blank, our competitor is outselling us. So I'm like, okay, so other than that, how many calls did you hear that in? What do they mean by they're outselling you? So they dug into that. And they're like, also, we have, over the last couple months, lost 5% market share to this competitor. So the threat that we're trying to avoid is we believe that if we keep our discovery calls as is, yes, we're at quota now, but they're going to keep gobbling up market, gobbling up our deals. And by the time that we try to do something about it, it's going to be too late. So in this type of problem, you're solving for the problem. There's a current amount of pain. They had lost a couple of deals. But what they're afraid of is the impact of, if they let this go on for too much longer, their competitor is going to win so much market share, things going to start to snowball, and they won't be able to turn the tides enough. So they're trying to solve for it now. So a threat-based problem, it's going to be solved for based on one of two things, or a combination of the two. And I want you to think of them almost like levers. The amount of impact that happens if the threat does become true, the amount of pain that they're going to incur, and their belief that the threat will become true. So hypothetically, if I were to, okay, I'll give you a great example. These are all examples on the fly. Did I have any buyer intent to buy a huge lock, to lock it on the outside of it, like in a staircase, to put a key in there so that I could get in my apartment? Zero buyer intent. I didn't need it. I don't want it. Why would I want that? It looks tacky. There's nothing that's going to come true. And the reality was, if I got locked in my apartment, I knew it was a big deal. But I thought, I always take my keys with me. I can't think of a time where that's ever happened before. And even if I got outside of the door and shut it and realized I don't have my keys, I'll just go back in. Let me see if anyone can figure out what I'm doing with this. Now that I'm based in Paris, what happened? But let's see if anyone can call it before I go into it. So I had zero buyer intent. Don't need to buy the lock. If you would have walked up to me with a huge lock and been like, do you want this? I'd be like, no, that's tacky and I don't need it. I have 2 sets of keys and I never leave my keys behind. I'm completely fine. So the reality of that threat is going to become true. Yep, Aaron got it. The doors here in Paris, just for anyone who's listening, anyone who's listening or comes to Europe, When you close them behind you, regardless of whether you put the key in and lock it, how they're situated is they lock automatically, right? So there's no way to push your way back in. So I'm taking the trash out the other day, and I'm like, Becc, we should really stop leaving our door ajar. So I close it behind me. And the minute that I had done it, I realized that I had made a mistake. I'm like, oh crap. I don't think I can get that back open. I try and push on it and I can't. So what that caused me to do was I went to my neighbor's house, this poor little old couple. They're modern dancers. And I was like, hey, Philippe. He was like, what do you need? I was like, I'll lock myself out. He's like, Merde. So what I had to do is go through their apartment. Thank God that they let me in, but I'm on the 5th floor, which in the US is the 6th floor. And they have we have a shared terrace, but there is an entire thing in between those two that is glued in, and there are spikes on the top. So what I was forced to do was to jump on a chair, scale over scary spiky thing that is probably, I don't know, 10 feet high. And all I'm thinking is and keep in mind it was raining, all I'm thinking is if I slip, I'm dead. I'd fall over that edge, go 6 feet down to the cobblestone, and I'm dead. I knew that threat probably that I would, if I had to do that process, then it would be extremely scary and that I might die. So that impact is pretty high that I'm going to die. However, I didn't believe that the threat would ever become true because I take my keys with me all the time. And I had had no experience where I'd left my keys behind. So I didn't have any buyer intent beforehand to buy a huge lock. Guess who just bought a new lock because now I'm aware that the threat can become true. So how you can surface these things for your buyers, for example, is if you were to search for expats who just moved to Paris, who have had no experience living in Paris and just moved into their building, you now have a good community that probably are unaware of that threat and that come true. And you can cause, because I noticed for every floor, there is a huge lock with keys in it for people. I'm like, I wonder why people do that. Now I know that, but I didn't know before. So if you were asking as a sales rep, if you were selling locks and you're like, do you want a lock? My answer would have been no, because I never think the threat's going to be true. However, what I didn't know and what you could offer the conversation is the fact of that locked doors, when you close them, like if I were to be standing out in the hall and it closed itself, I'm done. So all of a sudden you would create a buyer intent by surfacing knowledge that I didn't know that now is a buyer intent out of thin air. So this is going to be a threat-based problem. The third is going to be a prescription-based problem. So if in your notes, I don't know if this would be fun or helpful. If in your notes, if you could write out these problems and then for you, identify either one or two of each type of these problems, what they are for you. So we'll kind of do like a workshop on the fly. So negative symptom-based negative symptom-based problem is pain in the present, and they're solving to alleviate that and avoid a future impact. Second is a threat-based problem. What threat could become true in the future if they don't solve for it now? The third is going to be a prescription-based problem. So I'm getting into kind of fun problems. Prescription-based problem is basically someone did have a problem in the past, usually a negative symptom-based problem. They bought something, and that solution didn't work, probably because the rep misdiagnosed. So the impact of what they're trying to solve or solve for, yep, I have several hideaway keys now, TJ. Your girl's not going to die in France anymore. So a prescription-based problem, the difference between that and any other type of problem is they've already tried to solve for it, and they've already spent budget to do it. So usually these types of buyers are going to be very, very interested, higher urgency, but also higher evaluation skills on your solution because they already tried to solve for it with budget, with time, with political buy-in. It didn't work. And now they're trying to solve for the same problem with less budget, less political buy-in, and it's probably increased in terms of aggression because there's a certain amount of time. So I think I said this in the first webinar, but I want you to imagine that your prospects are all of the toys in Toy Story. I think it's Toy Story 2, where they're headed down that rubble hill and there's a fire pit of death in the middle. So that impact becoming true is the fiery pit of death. They're Woody and Buzz Lightyear and everyone else on the top of the rubble hill. They try to spend budget, political capital, etc. It doesn't work. You have just sped them up down the hill to like halfway to where they have less budget, less political buy-in, less everything to be able to solve for the problem. They have less time. So prescription-based problem, it's even higher need to make sure their diagnosis is complete and correct. Usually they're going to be very inherent because they've already tried to solve this problem. The problem's gotten worse and what they did didn't work. So this is usually going to be indicated by the impact is closer than ever before, but it's typically going to be a negative symptom based problem. So in this example, in this true example, someone came in and they basically, it was an SDR leader. They were at roughly 40% of quota, put 52 in the sheet just to be nice. They were 40% of quota. They had taken in a third party training company. They deployed it all. It didn't work. So basically they had less buy-in and they're like, I think that I'm going to get fired next month if we don't raise this. So I had less room and wiggle room to get these people to quota. Another example, client we're working with now that I'm thinking of, is they bought several different tools in the space. One that checks your emails to say if they're okay or not. I'm going to give everyone some heads. One that will check your emails to say if they're okay or not. A sequences service. And they wanted to bring me in. And so I'm like, well, you just bought these two, if you don't mind me asking. And they're like, they didn't work. And I'm like, well, what do you mean by didn't work? And I'm like, I'm not asking just to draw out for pain. I want to know the details of what made it not work so that I'm sure that I don't speed Woody up to the end of the cliff, right? So in these case scenarios, I'm asking a lot of questions because ethically, they have already been put through quite a bit and they're already close to the fiery pit. So I don't want to add to that. They're like the email correction tool, basically. They're like, we paid 52 bucks per seat and it didn't work. My reps didn't even use it because you could put a comment in there and it would jack it up like 10%. They're like, it didn't work. Drove no behavioral change. The sequences that we got were awful. They were worse response rates than the ones that they had before. Yes, it does live on the FlipScript YouTube channel. It is recorded. So prescription-based problem, I'm trying to make sure that their diagnosis is correct for them and for me, but they usually are going to be very, very inherent on this. The fourth type of problem, I've got 22 minutes left. Speaking of pain, we have 22 minutes left and then we're done. So I'm gonna speed up here. Number 4 is a sign-based problem. This is my favorite type of problem. It sounds weird. But it's a difference between a symptom and a sign. Chris, look at you. Chris, you want to work at Flip the Script? Look at this. Here's the channel. So a difference between a symptom and a sign medically is a symptom is noticed by the patient originally, is oriented on pain, and it cannot be tested for with overt criteria. You can't test from an objective perspective on pain. The only thing you can ask is, where does it hurt? Does this hurt? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much does this hurt? A sign, oh, Chris, this just broke me up. You'll be there soon. I almost wanted to, I'm going to ping you afterwards, Chris. So a sign, I appreciate you too. I really do for putting this in the channel too. Took a lot to admit. A sign is going to be an indicator to you as the doctor or the expert or the AE that there is a problem that the doctor always notices first, that can be tested for, that's an objective, overt criteria that they're in trouble. The reason that I love these is because you are asking questions that are a hotbed that help you know that there's a problem when they didn't know there was a problem. So a great example of this is, I'll give you two and then we'll move on. I'll give you three. The first one is I'll ask them, what's your open rate? And if they say anything less than 50%, I know that there's an email deliverability problem. So one of the main predicators that is preventing reps from being able to hit their prospecting quota and revenue teams from achieving their quota is email deliverability. The emails aren't winding up in your prospects box. The reality is there's a huge chance, if you're listening to this, that you have an email deliverability problem. So it doesn't matter if you craft a better message or higher quality message or send it a certain amount of time or send a certain amount per day. If they're not getting delivered, if a tree fell in the forest and no one was there to hear it, did the tree actually fall? And the answer in this case is no. So the questions that I'm asking is, what is your open rate? And when they tell me, if they're like 20%, I don't launch into, you have an email deliverability problem. I want to know a certain amount of more details. So I'm like, okay, so can you give me a number of examples? Can you pull up your screen of, all the most recent 100 emails that your rep sent? You pull up their screen and almost without exception, it's always the same subject line for the last 100 emails. I'm like, well, there's one of the root causes, their email deliverability problem. Because if it's all the same subject line, Google's going to be like, this is non-human behavior. And they're going to, your email deliverability can basically get dinged over time. And when it dings you, it dings your entire team as well. Another one is red font, exclamation points, more links, the worse. If they're broken paths or broken links or non-credible resources, the worse in terms of links. So if you're putting your website, a piece of content, and the content link is broken, and then your Calendly link, it's going to hurt you more and more and more and more and more. If you put the word LinkedIn in your subject lines, it's usually going to flag it over to their social folder, which they don't see. If you don't have a custom tracking link, there's a certain amount, I think I put together a list of 75 words in the subject line that will cause you to go to spam filters. If you're sending more than 50 emails a day, if you're sending them all at the same time, if you're sending them equidistant, like 105, 110, 115, 120, etc., it's going to cause more and more and more and more and more email deliverability problems. So think of it like Gmail. If you're not connected to the internet, it'll say, I'm going to retry in 5 seconds. And then it counts down and it retries. And if it doesn't work, it will kick it up to 20 seconds. Like, I'm going to retry in 20 seconds. And then after that, it's 45 seconds. Then it's a minute and a half. So that's like email deliverability. Very few things are permanent unless you're blacklisted. Then you're going to have to go to the blacklist and get removed from the blacklist. But all of this to say, if I ask them, how many emails do you send a day? And they're like 200. I'm like, oop, they're probably in timeout with Google for sure. I'm like, can you show me the email subject lines? They're all the same. I'm like, oop, there's email deliverability. I'm like, what's the open rate? And they're like, industry average is 15 to 25%. So they're like 20. I'm like, there's an indicator that it for sure is email deliverability is one of their problems. So I'm asking all of these questions because it helps me know what are some of the root causes and that this problem exists when they don't know. So the reason that I'm doing that, yes, Outlook is actually going to be worse because Gmail can essentially, Google at large can identify who the bad boy is because they're the sender and the receiver usually. But it's going to be worse with Outlook because they aren't the sender and the receiver. But essentially, I'm asking these questions to understand, does a problem exist that they don't know about? So another great example is demo request process. The highest I've ever seen is at 22.5% of people who request a demo actually get a demo. The highest I've seen is 22.5. The lowest I've seen is 4%. The hybrid is around 9. So most programs don't know that though, because a marketer is measured on MQL. So sometimes when someone requests a demo, they get points for an MQL or a demo request if they're metric like that. But they are never metriced on how many demos were set. and how many hit a certain amount of criteria. I've never seen that in an organization. So they're like, all these people requested a demo, but no one's watching on the back end of whether these people actually set meetings. And considering speed to lead is paramount, people are churning hundreds of thousands of demo requests every single second. It drives my mind, it implodes my mindset. So the questions that I ask are, so your demo request, I notice that you have a button on your website, and usually I'll diagnose it for them. I try to inbound. I'm like, can you describe the demo request process to me? Are you round robining? And they're like, yeah, so we're round robining across our team of SDRs. And I'm thinking in my head, oop, there goes 50% of their leads. And I'm like, what happens if I do it on the weekend? And they're like, oh, well, if then they'll get back to you on Monday. I'm like, oop, there goes another 25% leads. I'm like, okay, so this is a goal of, once they do get back to them, and they fire off an email or whatever. And let's say that they do set up that first call with the SDR. What is that call for? And they're like, to ask them a certain amount of questions to better gear for the demo. And I'm like, are they bank questions? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, oop, there goes another 10% of their leads. I know that all of those questions mean that they likely have a huge problem, that they are churning upwards of 95, 96% of their demo requests because of process. So I'm not asking them, do you have a problem with 96% churn of your demo requests? I'm asking them other questions to help diagnose. And then at the end, I'm like, if you wouldn't mind, if you would look for this metric, maybe a lot of companies don't have it. I'm like, check out of the people who requested a demo, how many actually received a first meeting and showed up for it. So the more questions that you're asking on the website, the more hoops that you make them jump through. You got to keep in mind, let's say they put in their email and they put it in wrong. And then they'll be like, thanks, we'll follow up with an email. And I'm like, first of all, it's going to be 2 days later. And stats will show you that after 5 minutes, there's a significant drop off in people actually scheduling the time. They flip ego states, they forget, blah, blah, blah. And the vendor who gets back to them quickest is the best. It can all be alleviated with better process, with Chili Piper. However, they don't know that the problem exists. So if I went up to them beforehand and said, do you have any buyer intent for Chili Piper and calendaring software? They're like, no. And I'm like, they don't know that the problem exists. So if I send them an email and let's say that the email, because the email deliverability problems didn't even wind up in their inbox, or it's the wrong email address, or it ends up in their spam or their promotions folder, or their social promotions folder. So the sign-based problems are going to be the most, or another one, and then I have to move on. I'm going to blitz out I promise I'll hit my KPI. I'm going to blitz out the last 8 problems. Another one is I'll ask people, I'm like, okay, so when SDRs hand over an appointment to the AE, when does it become an opportunity? What are the criteria? And they're like, oh, so it's based on need. I'm like, is it more subjective stuff like need, timeline? This is a decision maker. Is it objective criteria? Like how many people actually are at this organization? They're like, it's subjective. So it's based on need. I'm like, oop, they have a problem. There's probably when I ask a certain amount of questions, like who's responsible for flipping the opportunity? And they're like the AE. I'm like, uh-oh. And then I'll ask a question, hey, so what is the swing rate of how many people who, how many appointments are actually becoming an SQL? And they're like 60. I'm like, oh, that's not even half of it. The internal war that's probably being caused of the SDR is following with the AE. Then sometimes I'll ask a question, which very rarely do they know this data point. I'm like, so from AE to AE to AE to AE, for all the AEs across your team, what is the swing ratio between what percentage that they're qualifying per rep? I've seen a swing rate, no kidding. I'm telling the Bible truth. Go Kim Kardashian, Bible. 4% with one rep were being accepted. 94% were being accepted with a second rep. So all that's showing you is that there's too much subjective criteria. One person's being super mean. You got to keep in mind, AEs are measured on their conversion percentages. So they actually have incentive to say something is not qualified. So I don't want it to count until I know it's going to close. So there is a war of back and forth, and like the SDR sets the appointment, not knowing of like, is there a need? It's really subjective. And I'd argue that an AE should find the need when they're in the room. That person jumped on the line because they have a problem in their head they think that they can solve. So when I'm on with as the AE, I'm going to create buyer intent out of thin air by finding problems that they didn't know about and impacts they didn't know about. Point being, I'm like, there is a war here. And on a side note, if all of your SQL criteria is subjective like need, you have no objectivity of what your conversion percentage is into closed won. Because the static point is when the rep thought it was qualified. So you essentially have no data on the back end of what your conversion is. So point being, the questions that I'm asking is, what are the SQL criteria? What are the conversion percentages per rep? How quickly do they flip the opportunities? How often do they flip the opportunities? Because and when I say, what is it based on? They're like SQL criteria. And I'm like, and what are the criteria? They're like, is there a need? Is there a timeline? And I'm like, we're back in Banville. I don't say that on the point. I know that that means that there's a problem, but they don't know that that means that they have a problem. Lateral-based problem, we're going to speed up. We're going to do 2 minutes lightning round per problem. Sorry, y'all. So lateral-based problem essentially is they had a problem, they bought a solution, it solved the problem, but it created a new one. Oh man, I cannot tell you how many lateral-based problems there are. Great example. I bought the iPhone 14 so that I could avoid the impact of when I was running the New York Marathon, losing charge, so I couldn't finish the race. And it helped me do that because I was afraid that I would lose music. So I'd lose my mojo because I'd lose Taylor Swift. It did all of that. But what it did do is, for all my runners out there, it shifts your screens back and forth at the touch of a button. When I'm running, I probably shift accidentally screens 200 times. What that meant to me during the marathon is I switched screens so many times that it locked me out of my phone for an hour. So I crossed the finish line and I'm like, uh-oh, I don't feel good. I haven't eaten anything the entire race. My body temperature went down, apparently, I don't remember it, to 89. Some guy found me, threw me over his shoulder, took me to a medical tent. I don't remember much of this. They had to put salt blocks under my tongue. They had to hydrate me, forcefully hydrate me. I was batting it away. I'm like, no, I don't want soup. Brendan, I don't want soup right now. I just finished marathon. They had to get salt in my body. But the problem that it created is all of a sudden I'm like, my dad doesn't know where I am. My dad was in New York City for the marathon. So I'm like, I can't call him. And no, I don't know his number by heart. So I was in the medical tent. Apparently, I passed out for 3 hours. Thank God I had find my phone on with my dad and Keenan, oddly enough. So they pieced it together on where I was and why, and used the cops to figure out I was in a medical tent. But I couldn't call my dad to let him know where I was. So a lateral problem is it solves the problem, but it creates a new one for them to solve, and they're coming in to solve that lateral problem. This is all over in tech. Goal-based problem, this is less of a pain. This is no pain in the present. They're solving for this problem. They have a goal in the future, and they essentially are setting out, they're solving for this in the present to hit the goal in the future, but there's no pain yet. So actually, Chris, if you're still in here, you are two of these problems in here. But leader comes in and they're like, I need 15 SQLs by the end of the year to hit my pipeline goals. They have no pain in the present, but they're setting up a team from scratch. So Chris was coming in. Sorry, Chris, I'm getting into too many details. You asked for it. You know, if like, hey, I want to solve for this now so that I hit this goal in the future. So this is more of a fun problem. There is no pain in the present. The pain happens in the future if you get the answer wrong and you don't hit the goal. So the outcome thereafter is achieving the goal in the future. The next one here is a future metric-based problem. This one, they are past their metrics in the present, whatever their metrics are. They're achieving their metrics in the present, but there's a metric that's going to be enacted in the future, which is making them solve for that now. So there's no pain in the present. The pain comes in the future if they get the answer wrong. I'll give you a quick example. I'm gonna hit the last one's lightning fire. I had a team, they were past quota. So like I'm going in, I'm diving in deep, 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 deep. Like, what's the quota? They're like 10. I'm like, how many they got to date? They're like 19. I'm like, wow, why are you here? And they're like, they're at 19 now, but here's the thing. There is, because we've been so far past quota, thanks revenue leaders, they're turning our quota into 30 in January. This is November. So like we need training now, because if we hold static at 19 by doing all the thoughts, behaviors, feelings, etc., that we were doing at 19, we're going to miss quota by like a significant margin, like 60, like 40%. So they were solving for now to yield a future state them that could hit the future metric. So they're past quota now, they're past their metrics now, but they're solving for a metric that's going to be enacted in the future. Future event-based problem. This is based on a future event that's going to happen that they need to become a future state so they avoid an impact. So a great example is, hypothetically, one of my really good friends, by good friends I mean my sister, was like, I need to lose weight because I'm going to get married. Future event is the marriage. She's past her weight goals now, but she wants to solve for in the current state. So in the future state, she is the weight that she wants based on the future event that the future event requires. Okay, okay, we got 4 minutes. I just heard a church bell go off, so I thought I was already at time. I was like, wow. So a great example of this that I put in here, true story, is I asked, I dug in, and they're like, hey, we're past all our sales targets. It's for an insurance company. I was like, then why are you here? And I was really candid. I was like, why are you here? Just like goodwill? They're like, that, and there is a mandatory lift that's happening in the future in a couple of months, where basically car insurance is no longer going to be mandatory in our state. So our sales totals right now, we're way past quota. But once that mandate hits, all of a sudden, people aren't mandatorily going to have to buy insurance. So we're trying to solve for our discovery skills now. I'm like, become a seller, because it's not mandatory that people buy anymore. So he's worried about all the total shifting down. So the future event was the law releasing people from having mandatory car insurance. And what it's creating was he was solving for something in the present to avoid the impact of missing quota in the future. So no pain in the present, but you're solving for a future state. 9 is success-based. This is going to be basically a problem that is created by someone's success. So as we navigate here, we're going to get into more positive-ish problems. Someone's passed a metric, but it has created a negative problem to them. So I'll give you an example. Marketing team came in and they were like, hey, so we need basically your help for sales process and marketing inbound process. I'm like, okay, tell me why. And I'm like going through the numbers. And usually someone hire me is because they weren't hitting their marketing demo request totals. And so they need to find a way from a demo request perspective or from a form fill perspective to hit those totals. So I dig into the totals and they're like, we're 240% past our demo request total. When I cut, and this was a big company. They were about to turn public. Now they are. So I'm like, why are you here? And they're like, here's the thing. People on the back end, because we have gotten overwhelmed with demo requests. I'm like, must be nice. Must be nice. We have all of a sudden not been able to get to them quick enough. So we're starting to churn a whole lot of business, even though we're past the demo request total. People can't get a demo. So we need to find a way, because our current team size of SDRs, it's not big enough to field all the requests. So we need a way without and we can't expand from a hiring headcount perspective fast enough. So we need a process that's more automated to involve less headcount to do it, so that it doesn't create more of a problem in the future. I'm like, do you mind me asking what happened? They were like, yeah. So someone contacted our CRO and said they tried to request a demo, and it took them 2 weeks to schedule one. I was like, ah. So the pain that they're worried about in the future is that even though they're past their totals, that a CRO, CEO, etc. would find out, and now they're astute to this and are digging in, and they wouldn't fire them because they're not past their demo request totals. They would fire them because they're not converting them. So like, I'm going to find a marketing leader who's not going to flush all this process down the toilet. So can y'all give me 3 extra minutes? I promise I'll close in 3 minutes. 3 to 4. We're almost done here. 10th problem is an amelioration-based problem. Simply put, they're past their metric, but there's something in the current state that's just bothering them. I'll give you an example. Someone was like, I want to improve the quality of the cold emails. And I was like, why? Dig in, they're past quota. And I was like, so why do you want to improve the quality? And they're like, honestly, our emails look like trash. I get it that we're past quota. I think it's because of our brand name. And our sales leader got an email from one of our SDRs that was passed to them by a prospect that they know. And they were like, bro, is this seriously how you're running your organization? That was the current event trigger. So they're like, this thing bothers me. I want to make it better. So the outcome that you're solving for in this case scenario is whatever they think is bad, and whatever they want to yield that to is the gap, essentially. So they are past their metric, but they're just trying to make something better. The reason I'm bringing up these cursory problems, a lot of times when people come in for the inbound problem, like negative symptom-based problem, etc., if you try to jam them into that infrastructure of pain, and you're like, but you're past their metric, and they're like, I still want to make it better. And you're like, but you're past your metric. This person thought that their VP of sales thought that they were now a joke. They're like, I don't know how you're hitting quota, but it's certainly not because of the quality of your reps. So if you don't know the differences between these problems, as the sales rep involved, you're going to try and solve for a conversion problem when that's the problem at stake. So 10 is the amelioration-based problem. There's something that's bad in their current state. They're past their metrics, but they just want to make it better. So I'd be tied on defining why they think it's bad, defining a couple of items why you think it's bad if they miss that in their diagnosis, and then the outcome they want to achieve is a future state of better to alleviate the impact of what happens if they don't make them better. Number 11, it's going to be an opportunity-based problem. I'm very short with this. An opportunity is they're past their metrics, but the problem they want to solve for, remember how I said the size of a problem is equal to the pain, most case scenarios, or pleasure. So they're past their metrics, but they see an opportunity in the future that they could seize to actually get something that's double or triple down. Now, the reason that I put this as number 11 is people are always going to solve for pain much more than they're going to solve for pleasure. So usually they're going to stay put. A great example of this is spiffs that are put into place. People are very rarely going to buy training to get a spiff, depending on the size of the spiff. And from a financial perspective, does that help them solve a negative problem, like they can't hit their mortgage? Usually people are going to buy because they can't hit their quota. However, sometimes they're like, I'm past quota, but I believe that I can hit this spiff if I can hit this spiff and get double, triple, quadruple the outcome output from a money perspective if I make something better. The reason people are resistant to do this is if I change one thing, it might undo the fact that I'm hitting quota. However, an opportunity-based problem is they see a potential opportunity they can seize in the future. So the outcome that they want is that opportunity is realized, and it is a positive impact in this case. It's not a negative impact. So the size of the problem is the experience, whether pain or pleasure, plus the impact. So as with any impact, it's what's the size of it and what's the reality that it's going to come true. So a great example is lottery tickets. The impact, if I were to win the lottery and get whatever, $5 billion or something, it would be huge hypothetically, but people don't buy tickets that often because the likelihood's low. So an opportunity-based problem is going to be the positive impact plus the pleasure in the present. They're past quota. They're feeling good about themselves. They think they might get a raise or become an AE. The opportunity that they're going into is to double down to get into a positive area. So if I change, but I only might get a little uptick, I'm not going to risk it, because it might, if I change how I'm doing things, it might undo the fact that I'm hitting quota. But an opportunity-based problem, and you won't see them that often, because again, there's no pressure like pain. The example being, I was in France. I all of a sudden started studying 3 hours a day French. I'd never learned it before. Could I have studied beforehand? Absolutely. But your girl over here was irresponsible and didn't study till I came here. I went back to the home to the US for 2 weeks to go get more stuff and come back. I didn't study while I was home, even though I knew the pain would be here when I got back, because there's nothing like pain in the present. When I got back, the girl started studying again. So opportunity-based problem is to seize an opportunity in the future. And then the last one is a positive symptom-based problem. This is they are experiencing pleasure in the present, and they want to extend that pleasure. So rep was past quota. They believed that they were past quota because they had consistently reached out to sales trainers. This is a true story. His name is Juan. I'm not going to give you last name, so I don't oust him. He was like, I'm way past quota. The reason I believe that I am past quota is because I sought out consultants and trainers to train me to always get 1% better. So I kept asking question after question after question. And I'm like, that's truly the case. He's at 24 SQLs versus an 8 SQL total, but he wanted to get even higher. Now, hypothetically, it might cause something positive. What he wanted to do was prolong that positive symptom in the present. So a negative symptom you want to stop so you avoid an impact. A positive impact you want to keep or a positive symptom you want to keep going for a positive impact. So they're opposite sides of the coin. Again, you're not going to see these two often because there's nothing like pain in the present. However, it is a case scenario. So kind of a summary of this, the punchline of this is there's a lot of different slides in here. We're going to cut it for today. But our job in sales, it's simple, but it's not easy. The commitment that we should have to our buyers is that we're going to make their day better, solve their problems, and how we're going to do that is by identifying all the information that they don't know. Worst case scenario, even if they don't solve for it, at least they knew it. Worst case scenario, if Southwest Airlines hadn't have bought a new system, they didn't believe that future impact, at least they knew about it. So that's not only the responsibility, but it's the opportunity in front of us is to really have our buyers back, solve the problems that they knew about, but identify problems they didn't even know about so that tomorrow they're better than they were today because they ran into us. So that's everything. It's a long webinar. Thank you very much to everyone for sticking with me. We will be sending out the recording and we will be putting the deck in here. I had a whole nother batch of slides. We're not going to get into them today. So we're going to be doing webinar 4. We're finally going to, true to form, we're going to get to demo. So webinar 1 was diagnostic selling. Webinar 2 is what are you challenging? This webinar was on all the problems. If you want to, and you haven't had way too much of me today, which you're probably like, yes. Webinar 4 is going to be, now that we've acquired all that information, what do we do with it in demo? What do we demo? How do we do it? You know, like, how do we map our problems back to these different features? The hint is if you cannot demo and do discovery in the same call. Those are happening. You cannot do oil and water. You cannot do demo and discovery in the same call. So webinar 4, which we're going to do next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We're going to go into everything when it comes to demo. But thank you very much. Good selling. Someone said that in the chat in French. Thank you very, very much to everyone for attending. We'll send out the deck, send out the recording, and as always, may the selling odds be ever in your favor. Have a good week. Have a happy selling, happy discovery, happy prospecting, and I will see you all next week. Toodaloo.